Climate change litigation is a range of different kinds of actions brought in state, national, and international tribunal under a wide range of legal theories, all which have in common that they engage the problem of climate change. The suits at their core deal with the state corporate regulatory dynamic around climate change. So you see suits roughly breaking into regulatory actions which are aimed at forcing government to regulate more stringently or forcing government to limit its regulation of climate change. And then there are suits that are directly targeting major corporate emitters. These suits actually have in the last couple of weeks really come to the fore as the Second Circuit and the Fifth Circuit have both made decisions allowing suits to go forward in which major companies are being sued for their contributions to climate change and injury to the plaintiffs. Climate change litigation matters because it ends up impacting the state corporate regulatory dynamic around climate change in a variety of ways. The suits not only push for greater for less regulation or push major emitters to limit their emissions, but they also become part of a dialogue about how we should be regulating this problem. What level of a government is appropriate to regulate it? How should each level of government participate in the regulatory dialogue? And so this litigation becomes a way of creating what I call a diagonal conversation, one in which a range of actors at different levels of government are able to dialogue across those levels about what our regulatory scheme should be. And so these suits end up mattering not only in the actual regulatory changes that they make and the actual corporate behavior that they influence, but they have an influence that goes beyond that in changing the regulatory conversation. Another piece of how they change the regulatory conversation is that they also have been changing our culture around climate change. Massachusetts v. EPA, arguably the most important piece of climate change litigation to date, in which the U.S. Supreme Court said that the EPA had abused its discretion in refusing a rulemaking petition under the Clean Air Act that was trying to push for motor vehicles' greenhouse gas emissions to be regulated. That suit, though it is actually resulting at this point under the Obama administration in major regulatory efforts under the Clean Air Act, in many ways, its larger impact is that it's changed the way we think about climate change. It's helped a growing public consciousness that this is a problem that matters, and it's spurred public policy action in a whole range of ways beyond the specific impact of the lawsuit. This book contributes to the dialogue about the regulatory role of climate change litigation by bringing together a range of leading practitioners and scholars to talk about this problem. Specifically, we've divided the book by the levels of government that are being the primary levels of government at which suits are taking place: the state, the national, and the international. And each chapter is essentially a case study of an action that's taken place or a potential action that might take place, so brings together both a practitioner's perspective, thinking about the nuts and bolts of these lawsuits and what might practically work, but also a scholarly perspective to say, how do we think about these suits? What do these suits mean? What are their regulatory role? It's really the first book to do an assessment of climate change litigation as comprehensively as we have, though certainly it doesn't attempt to do case studies of every single case out there, which would be impossible at this point given the exploding nature of this litigation. But it takes key cases and key areas, and so even as the litigation moves forward, these kinds of analyses will be important for practitioners and scholars who are continuing to think about this problem. One of the things that the conclusion highlights is the multi-scalar nature of climate change as a problem and climate change regulation. And by multi-scalar, I mean that climate change is a problem that cross-cuts every level of governance that we have, from the most individual to the most international. And these suits, which are taking place at a variety of levels of government and that are often debating what level of government should be regulating in what way, open up, I think, an important set of questions about how we should, with our sticky legal scales, with our legal system that is tied to specific levels of government and specific kinds of institutions, how we take that and grapple with a massively cross-cutting problem like climate change.